Over more than a decade, I've worked alongside Indigenous colleagues to explore if and how Australia should recognise its First Peoples in the Constitution. So, for people who are still deciding how to vote in this year's referendum, I thought it might be helpful for me to explain why I very much look forward to voting yes for the establishment of an Indigenous voice to Parliament. I'm not politically aligned. I'm a tax lawyer by profession with a keen eye for detail, and my firm has worked closely with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander clients for more than 30 years. All in all, I have a pretty clear picture of what we'll be voting on in the referendum. But let me start by going back to the moment in 2017 when I watched delegates at the First Nations National Constitutional Convention endorse the Uluru Statement from the Heart and its central recommendation for an Indigenous voice to Parliament. I was one of the very few non-Indigenous people present, and I experienced firsthand the hope, the joy, the sense of having reached a turning point in our shared history. It was one of the most spiritually uplifting experiences of my life. When people ask me, but what about the detail? How will the voice work? I tell them how important it is to understand the difference between what we will be voting on in the referendum and what will happen later. The referendum itself is fundamentally about recognising Australia's First Peoples in the Constitution in the manner they have proposed. I mean, surely it makes no sense to suggest we'd do it in a manner that is not acceptable to them. If Australians say yes to the principle that First Nations peoples need and deserve to have more of a say in the laws and policies that affect them, the detail of how the advisory body will function will be carefully determined by our elected representatives in the federal parliament and set out in legislation. And remember, if there's ever a need, this legislation can be changed by Parliament in the future, just like any other piece of law or policy. The only right that's guaranteed by the constitutional amendment we'll be voting on is the right for the advisory body to make representations to the Parliament and the Executive. The only thing politicians will not be in a position to decide or change is the existence of an advisory body that gives Indigenous Australians, the most disadvantaged group in our nation, an avenue to express a view on issues that affect them. The referendum would not introduce race into the Constitution because it's already there and has been ever since the Australian Constitution was created in 1901. It's not about interfering with our nation's governance or stirring up litigation. The highest non-political law officer in the land, the Solicitor General, has confirmed that, and it's most certainly not about creating division between Australians. Quite the contrary, what the referendum is about is recognising fellow citizens whose ancestors occupied this continent for more than 65,000 years before it was colonised by the British. And it's about improving the way governments have tried and largely failed to overturn the persistent, intolerable disadvantage experienced by too many Indigenous Australians. The main lesson I've learned over the decades as a lawyer working alongside Indigenous clients is that it's only by listening to people who are directly affected by problems, whether it's about health, housing or employment, that effective solutions are found. There is a huge potential upside from a successful referendum. And I can assure you from all that I know and all that I feel that there is no actual downside. Which is why, with all my heart, I encourage everyone I have the opportunity to speak with about the referendum to vote yes.
Authorised by Mark Leibler, Arnold Block Leibler, 333 Collins Street, Melbourne.